Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Tips and Techniques to Access Local Funding Opportunities. Just going to let everyone come into the virtual Zoom room and webinar. And as you're doing that, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Julie Baker, she, her, hers. I'm the Executive Director of Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. And I'm coming to you from the land of the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan, who are currently fighting to reinstate their federal recognition. Again, we're so pleased you're here today to learn about some of these local funding opportunities. As your statewide advocacy organization, we fight for funding and resources at the state and federal level, and then offer these tips and techniques and toolkits and support and consulting for those of you on the local level. And we have a phenomenal group of folks here today who will share their successes, their challenges, their struggles, their current case making that they're making to gain funding from specifically from ARP, the American Rescue Plan, as well as other things that have worked in their communities in order to access those funding. While we're waiting for a couple more minutes for folks to come in the room, I just wanted to also share some things that are happening at the state level. As you may, if you're following along with Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates, which is our direct lobbying organization where we have a lobbyist in Sacramento, we are currently working on a $1 billion budget ask of the state in the governor's budget, which will be finalized by June 15th. We continue to push on that. We have some amazing legislative champions who are supporting us on that as well. And we just received the support of Mayor Eric Garcetti from Los Angeles, Mayor Darrell Steinberg from Sacramento, the mayors of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, and Mayor Todd Gloria from San Diego, along with organizations like Cal Travel. So we're really excited to continue to push for that level of investment for the recovery of the arts, culture, and creative industries. And I hope that you will reach out to your own elected officials and ask them to vote in support of this particular funding request of $1 billion to reinvest into our sector. We're also working on a couple pieces of legislation, Senate Bill 628, which is the California Creative Workforce Act, and SB 805, which is a bill to work on the impact of AB 5 for specifically for performing arts organizations here in the state. Both of those bills, we're very pleased to report, passed through the Senate floor today and now go on to the Assembly. So that gives you a quick update while we're inviting people into the room. But we want to respect your time and get started here. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide if we have any sort of overview in the next slide. Yeah, so okay, so we're going to go ahead and just get started. I'm going to introduce our panelists right after I finish this quick overview of what it is that we're talking about today. So very quickly, and I also just wanted to state, if you want to enter into the chat, who you are, the land that you're coming from, please do and introduce yourself. It's nice for the panelists to see who's here with us in the room. And then if you have questions, we definitely have time for that towards the end. That's why we do these as 90 minutes. And so there is a Q&A function, and we ask that you please enter your questions into the Q&A function so we can keep that separate from the chat. All right, so again, I'm Julie Baker, I'm the Executive Director of Californians for the Arts, and I just want to give you a quick overview on what we're talking about today, and then we'll get into our fabulous panelists. So the American Rescue Plan, which is the COVID-19 stimulus package, or ARP, is a $1.9 trillion economic stimulus bill passed by Congress, signed into law by President Biden in early March. And the intention of it is to speed up the United States recovery from the economic and health effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. What's important about this bill too is that $362 billion are going to state, local, municipal, tribal, and territorial governments. So every city and county in California is receiving specific funding from the ARP plan, as well as the state has received $26 billion in ARP funds. So next slide. Just some wording on what the intention is. And the intention of this legislation is to shore up business and government stability, preserve jobs, and get people back to work. So this is sort of part of like thinking about your case making. What is this about? It is not about relief as much as it is about recovery. Next slide. And again, same thing, it's to respond to or mitigate the public health emergency with respect to the COVID-19 emergency or its negative economic impact. And this is right in the legislation, important for us in the arts to realize that including assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. And although arts and culture are not specified in those three terms, we know the direct correlation of arts and culture to tourism, travel, and hospitality. And if you need those specific numbers, I'm happy to provide those. What you see on the right is where we stand in comparison in terms of statewide gross state product, what our revenue is, arts and culture versus construction and agriculture. We are a very important industry to the state of California and to its economic recovery. Next slide. So it currently says, the bill says that the funds have to be apply to any reductions in revenue based on the most recent full fiscal year, and the deadline to spend these funds is December 31st, 2024. And it is our understanding that they will come in two tranches as well, as early as now, this month, and then in a year from now. This isn't actually something that is on our website that you can click on to see how much funding your particular city or county will be receiving. There's also monies going to the NEA and the NEH, and they will be distributing those as well. Some, I think, soon, if they haven't already. Next slide. And so here's a quick tidbit, and I'm just going to go through this fast because our amazing panelists are going to give you even more specificity on how to build your case. So we'll go to the next slide. So one of the things that's really important that you're going to hear probably consistently is that right now you need to be in conversations with your elected officials now, your local, whether it's board of supervisors, your city council members, you need to be talking to them now and saying that you are ready to give them an idea, a plan of how they can be spending this money. You need to give them your own case making using data and storytelling. You'll hear from Gustavo Herrera, the Executive Director of Arts for LA, around how you can utilize resolutions with your Board of Supervisors and City Council members in support of this type of work. You want to reach out to your networks like we have at the state level, where we're getting support from aligning industries like Cal Travel. See if you can talk to other industries that benefit from a healthy arts and culture corridor in your community, and see if they will support your specific ask. And then, of course, connect with us and your other regional arts advocacy organizations, of which there are many now across the state. Next slide. And so quickly, again, how can you frame it? You're going to talk about the impact, a disproportionate impact, because this is a bill that is specifically talking about which industries have been disproportionately impacted. And we've got several studies. And again, these are linked so you can get to these studies. We want to talk about how creative jobs are critical to the future of work. And there's a lot of data on that, and how arts and creativity improve health and well-being, because this is also related to the impact on public health. So what is arts correlation and relationship to having a healthy community? You want to talk about these things. Next slide. Of course, the economic benefit is huge, and there are things like these studies from Americans for the Arts that show for every, a typical arts attendee spends over $31 per person per event beyond the cost of admission. And this is really going to show the domino effect of having the arts and culture industry recover within your community and how important that is to other businesses. So sometimes when you're talking to policymakers or people, and maybe they think, oh yeah, we love the arts, but we don't understand the economic impact of it as well, utilize these numbers. Next slide. And I think it's really important to also really be very clear that we create jobs. We are very specifically making jobs, and that arts workers are real workers. Arts are labor. This is not just for fun. We're not just doing this as a side gig. This is a profession that takes a lot of work to become successful in this profession. And this is real labor. We're essential workers. We're second responders. And we are an industry that has long been undercapitalized. And when in this unprecedented time, and this is part of what the ARP funds are really introducing, is an incredible moment for us to really shore up not only the devastation of what's happened this last year, but the systemic undercapitalization of arts and culture. This is an opportunity for them to invest in the future of arts and culture in your community. We're a valuable social service and should be funded and contracted as we do other social services in your community. And artists provide value. We embed and we can employ artists and arts workers across other government agencies. So look for what is a prioritization that your local community is making in terms of they're talking about taking these funds. And if it's not specific to funding, let's say your arts and culture department only, how can you fit into other areas? And other ways that they can potentially fund artists and the arts sector. Okay, next slide. And then this is just going to get you into more resources. So these are all links on our website, and you can get all sorts of information that's going to give you a lot of specificity on and data collection that you can use. So that's my wrap on the sort of big overview of what is ARP and a little bit on how you can build your case making. I'd like to now turn to introducing our amazing panelists, and really a pleasure to introduce everyone here today. And so I'm going to start with Brad Erickson, who is the Executive Director of Theater Bay Area and has been on the board of California Arts Advocates for 17 plus years and has been an incredible advocate for the arts here, both in the Bay Area and the entire state of California. So welcome, Brad. And then I'd like to introduce Maria Gomez Contreras, who is the Deputy Director of Arts Council of Santa Cruz County. Welcome, Maria. And also introducing Gustavo Herrera, who is the Executive Director of Arts for LA. Welcome, Gustavo, who's also a board member of Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. And Rick Stein, who is the president and CEO of Arts Orange County and has been on our board for over 12 years and is the former president of the board, as well as Brad has been a former president of our board as well. And finally, and I just did this alphabetically, that's how I did it, Eliza Tudor, who's the executive director of the Nevada County Arts Council. And I am in Nevada County, so I get to call Eliza not only a friend, but also a neighbor, and I get to watch her awesome work here in our community. So we're gonna now switch to some specific presentations, and the first one will come from Rick. And Rick's gonna talk specifically about some success he has had already with ARP funds and distribution. So take it away, Rick.
Thanks so much, Julie. And Jade, if you could bring up the slide, please. So first of all, I'm proud to come to you from the ancestral lands of the Juanino Band of Mission Indians, the Hasheman Nation, and the Tongva people here in Orange County. And I know there is probably a wide range of knowledge already in our audience, from people who are looking to this to be an advocacy 101 to those who are quite sophisticated and experienced and just looking to hear what's going on and picking up some tips. But I'm going to begin with some success that we had. Last year at the time of the CARES Act being introduced and passed in Congress, we immediately went to work and put together a survey of our arts community and shared that with our Board of Supervisors and with other elected officials. And that resulted in more than $2.7 million in relief funds for our arts community artists, nonprofit arts organizations, and for-profit arts-related businesses. And a small piece of that, over 200,000, was money that we raised from the private sector, but the rest came from the CARES Act. Next slide, please. Jade, please. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this just gives you a brief overview, and if you go to our website at artsoc.org, you can read the full report. It's about 8 pages long, but it did attract front page attention in our daily newspaper, the Orange County Register, and I've outlined on the report there are a number of steps that we took leading up to it and following up on it, and other COVID related activities of our organization. So today I really want to, if we can go on to the next slide, Jade, please. We will get into just briefly the American Rescue Plan Act, where We have succeeded in getting our Orange County Board of Supervisors to approve $5 million in arts relief from their $615 million American Rescue Plan Act allocation. And we had quite a bit of news media coverage of that as well. So Jade, you can take down my slides, and I'm going to just jump right into some of you have heard the term grassroots, and others have heard grass tops as being distinct methodologies in advocacy work. And so the grassroots, you probably are more familiar with. That's when we get everybody to contact their elected officials. It's you know, on the ground, as many people as possible, getting them to speak up. Grass tops has typically been about targeting influencers. And I interpret it to mean also that direct contact that you make with your elected officials. And, you know, early in my career, I made a grievous mistake. My very first job where I spoke before a body of elected officials. I thought I did a great job. And the next day I got a call from one of my board members saying that I had single-handedly set back the cause of the arts decades with what I said. So I had clearly not done my homework. And that is the very first tip that I have for you. Do your homework. Know who your elected officials are. Here in Orange County, I have 7 congressional districts. I have 5 state senator districts. I have 7 assembly districts, 5 members of the Board of Supervisors, 34 different city councils, and 24 school districts. And it's a challenge keeping track of all of them, and you have to pick your battles. So in doing your homework, you know, as Julie said, you really want to know your community and gather data about the arts that will assist you in your talking points, and collect stories, anecdotal stories, because it's those heartstring stories that often really are the way to make your point across in the best way. But when you learn about who your elected officials are, find out what they care about. What are their hobby horses? What are their main agendas as an elected official? But also discover what experiences they've had with the arts. Many of them, you know, took piano lessons, or were in theater in high school, or they write poetry. You just never know. And that is a hook into their soul and a connection with the arts that is extremely useful in making your case. Also, be sure you know what resources are becoming available, like when the CARES Act came down the road, and now American Rescue Plan came down the road. Getting in there early and plotting a strategy and speaking with them about those possibilities before the funds are already committed. So pay attention to the timetable, check websites for meeting and decision dates. Build relationships. That's my other big tip. Treat elected officials like they're your biggest donors to your organization, like you do in your development program, your major givers, or your board members. Start when they take office. Better yet, start when they're running for office and get to know them. And don't wait until you need something from them to come knocking on their door. Cultivate a long-term relationship, because there may be term limits, but their trajectory as an elected official may lift them to higher and other offices where they can continue to be beneficial. Get on their email list and attend their events so they see you on a regular basis, and how you know about what's going on with them. So that's easier said than done. And you think that, well, I can't just call up my congressman or my state senator. Well, find allies. Find out who you know who knows them. We have a former board member who is a lobbyist and a former ballet dancer. So he volunteers his time and connects us to elected officials who we haven't met yet. The CEO of our Chamber of Commerce is a singer and loves the arts, and she writes letters of support from the Orange County Business Council when we need them. The CEO of the Orange County Community Foundation has great connections. So all of these people interact with elected officials on a regular basis and their staffs. And you know, who among your own donors are politically active and can introduce you? And again, finally, contact them directly. You are a constituent and you have a right to contact them even if you have no one to introduce you. Keep your electeds informed. Send them invitations, put them on your email list, share important news and reports. When the Otis report comes out each year, when Americans for the Arts or Californians for the Arts has new data to share from a survey, share it with them. Introduce them to their constituents in the arts, such as via a Zoom meeting. We try to have occasional Zoom meetings with a delegation of local arts leaders and our elected officials, particularly when they're newly elected. Inform them of opportunities to express their support for the arts by serving in arts caucuses and making them aware whenever arts-friendly legislation is being introduced or considered in committees. Ask their advice. The old philanthropy saying is, if you ask for money, you get advice. But if you ask for advice, you get money. Even if they assert their support, ask them if they can suggest any actions that will make it easier to achieve the goal you're seeking to help their own position of support as well. That way you can determine whether your grass tops approach is sufficient or whether you really need to bolster that underneath with letters from hundreds of constituents and to run a grassroots campaign. Sometimes that's desirable, sometimes it's necessary, but sometimes a grassroots effort can be detrimental, and the grass tops effort is sufficient and to achieving your goals. Work with your electeds. Find and develop opportunities to work with your elected officials in other ways. So there's something called the Congressional Art Competition, and almost every member of Congress participates in it. It's a high school student art competition. We work with 5 of our congressional district offices on that and assist them in promoting it, in securing a grant so that we can have prize money for the winners. We appear at their receptions. We work closely with their staffs, and it bonds us to them, and they rely on us, and they trust us, and they come to us for advice that they need when they want to appoint someone to a local arts board, or when they have a question about a piece of legislation that might impact the arts. And of course, when you have an event in their district or seek out every opportunity to have an event in their district, be sure to invite them to be there, offer them a chance to make brief remarks when appropriate, such as at a reception afterwards, and work with other arts organizations to do so in your district to ensure that the arts remains on their radar. And finally, let me just say this, thank them a lot. Whenever they do take positive action, treat them again, like I said, as a big donor to your organization. Thank them in handwritten notes or emails or letters. Thank them from the stage if they're present. And if you succeed in securing funding for your arts community, get others to send thank you letters for their grants as well, and ask for copies of those letters. The CAC does that for our grants, as many of you know. When we had the CARES Act funding, we asked all of those arts organizations who received grants to send such letters, and dozens of letters went to the Board of Supervisors. So lo and behold, 6 months, 8 months later, we come back to them for American Rescue Plan Act funds, and they were very receptive. They felt really great about the CARES Act money they made available and the impact it had, and the fact that they got attention from their constituents, and big thank yous, big pats on the back from their constituent arts organizations and artists. So thank them profusely. And that's all I have to share with you today. And I know that my colleagues will do likewise. Thank you.
Rick, that is just such incredible, valuable information. I was actually super wrapped. I was like, okay, yeah, everything you said, just it was golden nuggets of information. And I hope everyone who's listening took incredible notes, because I can tell you, Rick is incredibly successful at this in Orange County. And so really do heed what he's talking about. And I think one of the things that's interesting too, that you mentioned, and we're going to go to Brad, but is that there's a lot of work that you do when we're talking today about local funding, but the relationships to your congressional representatives and how important that is at the federal level, state level, and local level. It also goes to giving the integrity of the organization and a high profile for the organization, so that when your supervisors are seeing you standing next to a congressional representative, they're taking note and saying, oh, this organization has relationships like this. They're yield some power, right? So I think understanding
two quick Two
Yeah.
little points. One is apropos of that. Thank you. We asked thank you letters to be sent to all the elected officials because who had a hand in the CARES Act. So not just the Board of Supervisors. Our members of Congress obviously voted on that in Congress too. The other thing is that we're not done yet with ARPA funds. We're working with the city of Santa Ana to see if we can secure $1 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds for their arts community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And again, we'll follow up also. I'm sure many of our board members will also, and panelists will make themselves available if we don't get to all the questions today. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Brad Erickson, the Executive Director of Theater Bay Area. And Brad is based in San Francisco. And San Francisco several years ago had a really big victory with Measure E. And Brad, you were integral to the success of that. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you experienced and learned through that process. And then also, how does that influence now what has happened in terms of COVID and sort of securing yourselves in positioning yourselves for receiving additional funds?
Right. Thank you, Julie. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm calling in from San Francisco, also Ramaytush Alone land originally. I'm really thrilled to be with you all here today to talk about Proposition E. I just wanted to show this slide because we were really, really proud of this poster that we had. It actually, I think, shows the exuberance that we had as a campaign and emphasizing the beauty and the power of the arts. And you can take that down, Jade, when you're ready. It's a great success story, but it builds upon a miss, actually. What we were trying to do with Proposition E and were successful with, we tried to do previously with an earlier proposition, Proposition S, which we failed to actually win at the ballot box with that. And I think was an important lesson that we learned along the way. It's important to know that with both of these propositions, because they involved taxes, we did need to get a 2/3 majority to win. So when we talk about failing in any other world, it would have been a victory. With Proposition S, we got more than 63% of the vote. That's usually a landslide, but not when you need 66.6. So we just missed, and we just missed, I think, for an important reason, which I'll talk about in a moment. What both of the propositions were trying to do was to secure funding for the arts that would be dependable and ongoing and grow over time. Now, San Francisco was a pioneer in 1961 in tying money for the arts to our hotel tax. And a percentage of the hotel tax was dedicated to the arts and created a granting agency called Grants for the Arts, creatively, that grew over time and became an incredibly important source of funding for over 200 grantees in San Francisco. That piece of legislation over time sort of had additions added onto it, amendments, different things were added, sort of like barnacles on a ship. And over time, the city attorney began to feel that it was vulnerable to litigation. And I would say maybe about 8 or 10 years ago, the city attorney convinced the Board of Supervisors that we needed to disconnect that funding from the hotel tax to the arts that had been in place for nearly 50 years at that point. And what we began to see was that over time, the funding for the arts in San Francisco, which is considerable, even then it was up around $25 million per year, was going down year after year after year. And the impact on the arts field was tremendous as that begins to happen and people's grants are going down. Or another reaction was that the granting agency said, well, we can't really accept new grantees at this time. We're trying to protect the funding for the folks who are already in the door. That creates then, of course, it shuts doors for new organizations and often organizations of color being able to come up and get these funds. It created an inequitable situation and a situation where the arts community in San Francisco was fighting with each other to scramble after a continually shrinking pie. What we wanted to do with Prop S, and then which we were successful in doing in Prop E, was to reconnect funding for the arts to the hotel tax. which normally grows, but I'll get into that, over time, and create a stable funding for the arts that would grow. In both cases, we were successful in building a really wide coalition, a coalition that spanned large budget organizations and small budget organizations, BIPOC-led organizations, white-led organizations, individual artists, our cultural centers, all sorts of different parts of the arts field working together to grow the pie and to have more money for all of the different arts expressions that are taking place in San Francisco. What we failed to do in Prop S was to get our city leaders behind us. And while they were not actively in opposition, they were not actively in support. And that little bit of difference is that 2 or 3 percentage points from 64% to that when we needed 66.6. We came back a couple of years later with Proposition E. We worked again to build a really broad coalition that included the large budget organizations, the small budget organizations, the community-based organizations, BIPOC-led organizations, white-led organizations, individual artists, cultural districts, our cultural centers, all the different expressions of art in the city. The difference this time being that we were able to get allies within City Hall. And so Jade, if you could bring up the second slide that we've got here. And you'll see here that some of the folks who were working on this campaign, and you'll look at the diversity there. And some of you may or may not recognize the lady in the middle holding the poster. That is Mayor Breed. And to get the mayor on board and to get a majority of the supervisors on board and to convince them to be the authors of the proposition when it came out, that made all the difference. And it allowed people like Tom DeCaney that you'll see standing behind the mayor, who is then the head of the San Francisco Arts Commission, to actively work on the proposition. That made all the difference in the world. And when it came to election day, we won with over 75% of the vote. Reconnecting the arts to the hotel tax, creating a permanent and ongoing source of funding for the arts, bringing funding to across the board to cultural districts, to cultural centers, to grants for the arts, to the Cultural Equity Fund, and positioning it in such a way that the cultural equity grants and the smaller organizations and the BIPOC-led organizations would see their monies grow more dramatically over time, while creating secure funding for all organizations permanently. Or so we thought, because no one was expecting that there would be a pandemic 2 years after we passed Prop E. And the amount of hotel tax that was raised in 2020 was like nothing. And so what the impact of Prop E and what the impact of getting 75% of your electorate to be behind you means that you get someone like Mayor Breed to say, okay, so we've got to do something to make sure that the arts are still funded, even though there is no hotel tax this year. And so Mayor Breed created a way to backfill that funding to make sure that our funding only dipped a little bit in this pandemic year. Why? Because she likes to think of herself and bill herself as the arts mayor, which she is, but she also knows that 75% of the electorate in San Francisco voted for this and wants stable funding for the arts because they value artists in their communities. They value the work of the arts community. And Jade, you can bring this slide down at this point. That made all the difference in the world. And I think it made all the difference in the world when it comes to where are we in terms of the city supporting the arts field in the pandemic. So immediately after the pandemic, the city created a relief fund with funds that it had available from relief funds that were coming in from the federal government at that point. And that was made very, very quickly to the arts community. We have built on that by creating an artist core, hiring artists to do great things around the city to the tune of $5 million. We've created, and some of you have heard of this, the pilot for a universal basic income for artists. that the city is doing as part of this relief fund, $1,000 a month for 6 months going to 100 artists just to support them in their work with nothing asked for in return. We've created other funds in the city to help those arts groups with venues to be able to reopen, the monies that they'll need to shore up their HVAC systems and make sure that they're going to be able to be ready to welcome people back when it is possible to do that. All of this comes from the kind of support that we were able to garner in these two campaigns, the way that we were able to be unified as a field, and the case making that we made to the people of San Francisco about the value of artists in our communities and the value of the arts in their lives and their kids' lives. Those messages rang true when we came to the pandemic, and it's one of the reasons that we've had so much support from our city in this time. And that is my presentation.
Thank you so much, Brad. I think what's important here is that, and I think both you and Rick have talked to the fact that a lot of this is a long game. It's not to say that ARP funds are not, they're available right now. And if you haven't started the conversations and done all the things that Brad and Rick have talked about, it doesn't mean it's too late. It just means, though, that a lot of this does take time to build the relationship, to build the case making, to build the support. And you can see from what you accomplished in San Francisco is that you had this precedent. You had this already established, as you said, 75% of constituents saying, we support the arts and believe it should be funded, so that when you're coming to the crisis moment of COVID, there was already an established feeling that this was a priority for the city.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that. And I think that, obviously we're not all in San Francisco. We're not all Rick Stein, who's been doing it for 17 years with the relationships and such that he has. And so we also now want to turn to-
You mean Brad?
What did I say?
You said me.
Oh, Brad. I said Brad. I'm sorry, Brad and Rick. Sorry. Anyway, and so we want to turn to a community that I happen to know well, and Eliza Tudor is the executive director of the Nevada County Arts Council, and we come more from a rural perspective, and so Eliza's done a tremendous job here in the community to build awareness of the impact of arts and culture in our community. And I want to turn it over to Eliza and talk about what is it that you've been doing over the last several years in your role, and what are some of the challenges you're facing that maybe are unique to a rural community, or maybe others are also experiencing in their communities as well? So welcome, Eliza.
Thanks so much, Julie. And like you, I'm speaking today from rural California, home of the Nisenan and Washoe tribes in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Yes, so advocacy for us is a fairly new concept in our county. I arrived in rural California in 2016, and the standard response when addressing the county for funding for the arts then was, well, if we do it for you, we'll have to do it for everyone. And at the time, naively, this was a surprise to me with my urban arts background, because I assumed that all county governments supported their state local partners and the arts generally from a self-serving but holistic strategic perspective, because we all have the data that it's great and that it serves our communities, and that the county would see us as an advocate for our creative ecosystem in its entirety. But clearly our message just wasn't getting across. Plus, our agency was much younger than many of our grand legacy arts organizations locally, which meant we needed to offer reassurances of our intentions within our own sector almost first, so that we might better share a message that working together in advocacy was sensible, and that a rising tide would lift all boats. So every county and every county arts agency or state local partner has its unique challenges. Across California, the idea is that we use our local knowledge to avoid the duplication of other sustained efforts by other arts organizations or stakeholders, and we call this gap programming. In Nevada County, our creative sector is a sort of weird, peculiar hybrid. We're deeply rural, and yet we have a complex arts ecosystem with many arts organizations and informal groups. both contributing to the county's economic and social base, but also competing for scarce funding. And now for me, this feels like it's a sort of indicating a mix of urban and rural challenges. So this makes standing together, the work of advocacy, all the more urgent, particularly when faced with an unparalleled opportunity such as CARES Act relief funding and now American Rescue Plan Act stimulus funding. So with CARES Act funding, our county determined its course independently of Nevada County Arts Council or any outside consultant or partner agency. And it happened so quickly in terms of delivery and spend down that there was barely time to gather our advocacy forces. And this was an important lesson for us, and we heard it. Yet on the other hand, the county's discretionary support of the few was balanced by a sustained relief fund effort for small businesses and the nonprofit sector, stimulated by both the county and supported by us and a significant group of county-wide partners across all sectors. And this really did support the arts. And just to say, as a state local partner, we also subsequently created our own relief fund to support local professional artists in distress. And we also opted into California Arts Council CARES Act regranting initiative, through which we regranted $30,000 to creative programmers and arts organizations who were specifically supporting communities of color hard hit by COVID. This $30,000 was dispersed over 2 counties, not just one, since we opted in to support our neighbor, who was one of only a few agencies statewide suffering from a particular lack of capacity at the time. So fast forwarding, with ARPA funds, we were right onto it. And with the help of Californians for the Arts, no less. We first sent a general but passionate advocacy letter to our Board of Supervisors, co-signed by Julie as Executive Director of CFTA and Victoria as President, but then followed it pretty quickly with a very direct ask in relation to the important role Nevada County Arts Council might play for the county as a solution partner. We felt pressured to do this since the County Executive Office here had already mapped out its ARP expenditure plan without waiting for input, at least its preliminary plan. Our letter was accompanied by public testimony from creative sector leaders of arts organizations across all 5 of our supervisory districts. So we did everything right. It was delivered in the spirit of a discussion document to initiate a conversation on how we could best help the county invest ARPA funds to stimulate Nevada County's creative economy and to leverage other funds in support of the county's economic development policy objectives. We didn't receive a response, and the written public comments in support of our plan for the arts were not read out during the Board of Supervisors meeting, at which the county's own preliminary plan for the ARP expenditure was presented. But we're continuing on, and this is the important thing, is the long haul. We're working with an analyst from our county executive office, and we'll keep showing up in terms of influencing the process and the criteria for expenditure in favor of the creative sector. And we're also meeting individually with each of our supervisors to keep them updated. So I think, as you say, we're doing all the right things. It's just a long haul. And I'm reminded of all the things that we have at our disposal, such as, you know, the economic and prosperity study we produced in 2019. We have important interpretation linked to Treasury guidelines on how local government might spend the ARPA funds. So it's all good, and I think we're moving along.
Thanks, Eliza. So a couple of things I just want to clarify. So will you just clarify for those who don't know, what is a state local partner?
So we have 58 counties across California. And soon after California Arts Council was formed in, what was it? 1976, I think, wasn't it? In 1980, a state local partner program was created so that California Arts Council could be sure it reached every corner of California in order to serve its diverse population. So there's one of us in every county, and we report in both to California Arts Council and, if you like, to our county government.
Thank you. So, and I think some of the things that you talked about, you positioned yourselves to the county as a solution partner, which I
Right.
think is a really important two words that I think everyone should keep in your case making, which is that you're there to help provide solutions to get the community back on its feet in terms of economic recovery, arts and health, arts and wellness, getting people back together in terms of gathering, the ancillary benefits of having the healthy corridor and all that good stuff. You also did a data study, as you mentioned, a couple of years ago. And so and I know that that's really critical in terms of showing the economic impact. And it isn't just sort of an idea, it's actually been determined. So how do you utilize that data, and has that been helpful in terms of your case making with some supervisors?
It has, and it, not only with our supervisors, but with, in talking and thinking about, a rising tide lifts all boats, and the work we do to reassure our arts organizations broadly that we're not in competition, but that we're supporting and advocating for them in speaking up. Our arts organizations were incredibly grateful. I think we had 167 participants in that particular survey, which for a tiny rural county is exceptional. We surveyed literally everybody, and we're extremely conservative because we did it in relation in tandem with Americans for the Arts. We also have a digital asset map so that we can show our supervisors and our local politicians, this is what you have in your constituency. Look at these amazing resources in the form of cultural assets, whether they're historical landmarks, whether they're performing arts organizations, live venues, galleries, bookstores, it's amazing. So I think this research element, which seems such a slog and so unsexy at the beginning, is absolutely vital because it gives you the data from which you can base your case.
And thank you. And I think what you also mentioned is that you learned from the CARES Act funding and how quickly it was distributed and decisions were being made, that you had to be ready as an organization to be the advocates for the arts and culture, local arts and culture industries, and so it's all this. Again, I think we're all feeling a sense of urgency. How do we get those monies now within our communities? And hopefully, you're going to get some really great tips today to help build those cases for your but at the same time, I think we also have to recognize that advocacy is not a one-time experience. It is a long game. And creating those relationships now will also pay off in the next round of funding that comes. So don't give up, I think, is also the message that we're also want to impart. And I want to certainly impart specifically to you, Eliza, because you're doing a great job, and I'm sure we'll get there. And we'll get the funding when it comes down to it. So thank you for sharing what you're experiencing in a rural community. And hopefully, again, I see some questions coming into the Q&A. We've got 2 more panelists, and then we'll get to that as well. We're actually right on time. And it is my pleasure to introduce Maria Gomez Contreras, who is the Deputy Director of Arts Council of Santa Cruz County. And Maria, I actually am a banana slug. I am a graduate of UC Santa Cruz, and so happy to, what we were also thinking was that Santa Cruz is one of these interesting, it's urban, but it's somewhat a destination. It's not right there in the center of it all. You have to get there. It's a bit of a combination between the two. So if you could talk to us about what you've been doing from your perspective within your community to build the case to try and get some local funding for arts and culture.
Sure. I want to say, actually, before you share the slides, I want to answer your first question and talk a little bit about Santa Cruz County. We are a diverse county. We have our mountain community in Santa Cruz. It's a touristy and college town, Santa Cruz is. We have an agriculture community, which is different from our farm worker community. We have a big population of immigrants in our Watsonville city And we're a bedroom community for the Silicon Valley as well. We've been known to have a high density of artists. Actually, it's an older statistic now, but back in 2012, I believe we were the top highest density area of artists in the country. So we've learned to kind of do a graceful dance in our county, considering all of the and speaking and engaging with all of the different population groups that we have. If you can share the slides now, I'll go ahead and what I'm going to do first is go through a list of strategies that have really worked for us in Santa Cruz County, and then I'll ask for the slides to come down, and I'm going to focus on 2 of those. I'm just going to flesh out a couple of pieces of 2 of those. So I'm not going to spend too much time repeating what's already been said, but as you can see here, we don't have the very many. I was blown away with how many numbers of jurisdictional reps you have in LA. Well, we have 5 jurisdictions, 5 major cities, and 4 major cities in our board of supervisors, with whom we're in touch with constantly. So we schedule, like it says here, meetings between 2 to 3 times a year to keep them updated and to keep the arts really at the top of their mind, and to keep them engaged with actually what's going on the ground. Specific invitations to different arts activities and happenings are an important way to sustain that and nurture those relationships. We do intentionally establish these public relationships based on common interests and values, which some of my colleagues have already spoken about. And that's one that I'm going to flesh out once I go through these strategies here for advocacy. It's already been mentioned that, in collaboration with Americans for the Arts, there are these arts and economic prosperity reports that for us has been a really valuable tool. And I will also flesh this one out. But, in terms of that being a tool, it allows us to have shared language with our public representatives to be able to focus on exactly what Julie said earlier. The arts are an integral part of our economy. And we need to be able to speak that language because it's a very clear and shared interest. This has already been spoken to as well, but the longevity of relationships with jurisdictional reps has a lot to do. I want to say, just based on one of the things you just finished saying, Julie, is that advocacy is really relationships. At the very heart of advocacy is relationships. And we really qualify we describe our relationships. It's worked for us to describe them intentionally as public relationships. And we use a specific tool called the one-to-one tool. Some of you who are grassroots organizers will probably recognize that. It's a tool that comes with a really specific format to how to initiate a relationship, identify shared interests and values, and do it in a strategic way that includes a really specific ask, also has been said by my colleagues. So I'm sensing several patterns here, and I'm hoping the audience can catch on to that. There are certain elements that of advocacy that have really worked for all of us. And of course, our executive director has been in the nonprofit sector for some decades now. And so definitely leveraging the kinds of relationships that are required no matter where you are in or what sector you're working in, but in particular in the nonprofit sector, advocacy is a part of all of the work every year on an ongoing basis, and to really leverage the kind of historical from the historical perspective, to leverage that kind of history that you have with local representatives. If you can please show the next slide. And then the last 3 points here are a little more specific, but at a county level, we experienced a 10% cut in funding over the last year. And but because of our advocacy work over time, and because we were intentional about engaging with our elected officials and our partners over the course of the year, we ended up receiving CARES Act and didn't experience that cut. So that was a good thing for us and the community. We did, again, we're intentionally reaching out to our boards of supervisors really early on and talked about shared ideas and specific plans for how that money could be spent specifically for the arts, culture, and the creative sector. And then, in 2016, in our strategic planning sessions, we incorporated our one of our 3 strategies was really addressing the inequity in the arts sector here in our county. And because we'd already been doing several years of work around equity and really making not only our organization more equitable, but our partnerships more equitable, and the way we grant more equitable, we were seen as a synergistic partner in terms of addressing some of the inequalities that came up through the pandemic. And of course, we were invited to participate as an arts organization. If you can stop sharing the slides here, I think I have a couple more minutes, but I wanted to speak to flesh out a couple of my points here. So in terms of the relationship building, I described how we do that, and the 3 in terms of public relationships based on shared interests and values, that's really intentional. And what it has taken for us is to remember to really listen deeply when we're in meetings, to have meetings and to direct meetings and facilitate meetings that are not transactional, but that are relational, where it isn't just a presentation, but that really is a dialogue. So listening deeply is important, because that is the opening for us to identify and speak, but really verbalize what those interests are, what the values are. I stand for dignity, I stand for courage, and I stand for joy for all people everywhere. That matters. It's seeing them as donors, yes, and seeing them as human beings that care for the same things that we care for. Speaking responsibly has to do with listening deeply. Being intentional, I spoke about that. Being strategic. There's this, many of you may have heard about the idea of mission drift. It's been hard for us, and I'm sure for many of you, to say no to the very many unique and beautiful opportunities that come our way. But to be strategic and to not lose sight of really what we want to do and the results. Being results oriented is another one that has kept us, at least in the last few years, it actually has grown our budget quite substantively. And the last thing is, and I saw a question I think come up earlier, but for organizations that may not have this kind of trajectory in terms of advocacy, starting small and doing it well, and then scaling up, really evaluate, take the time to evaluate and debrief the kinds of advocacy you are doing or have done, and carry forward the pieces that work, because doing it well on a small scale and scaling that up, it's a win-win. It's a foolproof way of growing strategically, intentionally, and for results.
Thank you so much. There's so many great nuggets in there. And I think each one of you could do an hour presentation instead of just the 10 minutes. But I think a couple of things that I just want to also highlight in what you said, Maria, is specific plans, I think, are really important. Bringing those forward if you can, especially right now when they've got so many different decisions that they're trying to make, that if you can say, here's something that we think checks all the boxes in terms of what ARP funds specifically are about, and will help with jobs recovery. I think we need to talk about jobs and how it can be spent, and and support that. But in terms of overall long-term advocacy, what I think you said so many beautiful things, but that idea of that it's not just transactional but relational is really, really critical. I think we often forget that these are humans. Many of them, when you look at where they come from, they have been nonprofit leaders, they have been school teachers, they have been business owners, they have grew up in the arts, going to classes, and finding that connection to their humanity and to what they also, why they got involved in the first place in political office. I think you can make those connections to be successful. So I really appreciate those words of wisdoms, and for you sharing that. So I'm going to go to Gustavo Herrera now, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions and answers, because we have more here. And thank you again for that, Maria. So Gustavo Herrera is the Executive Director of Arts for LA, also a board member of Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. And Gustavo, take it away. Tell us what's happening in LA County, and what you're doing is now also, if I can say that Gustavo runs a professional advocacy organization. That is what they do for a living, and to serve LA County. So what have you been doing specifically in terms of ARP funds, and if you could share with us?
Absolutely. And Julie, thank you. And Medea, thank you for everything that you just shared. I think it sort of perfectly aligns with a lot of the message that I'll share here. Again, my name is Gustavo, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm coming to you from Tongbaland, a city of West Covina in Los Angeles. And I'll start by giving you just the backdrop of Los Angeles. Similar to Rick, our county is gigantic. We have 80 school districts, 80 plus school districts, 80 plus cities, municipalities, 5 supervisorial districts, just math, about 11 million people are living in this county. And so it's just absolutely massive. What we have been up to, we have been advocating every step of the way for CARES Act funding to be meaningfully include arts and culture. There were roughly $13 million of LA County CARES Act funding that was allocated specific to arts and culture. With ARP, I'll share with you a very specific example. Our LA City Department of Cultural Affairs was in a very, very tough position, similar to what Brad shared with us earlier today. Our LA City Department of Cultural Affairs, our local arts agency for LA City, is primarily funded through hotel bed tax. Hotel bed tax here in Los Angeles down about 72% or so. So our job as advocates was really to ensure that American Rescue Plan dollars specifically could help backfill that and increase the funding for the LA City Department of Cultural Affairs. Here's how we did it. We worked very closely with a local city council member, LA City Council Member Lee, who introduced a resolution back in February. That resolution, and if you could, Matt, I have dropped, can we drop that link? Arts for LA has created a toolkit for you all. If you're interested in pursuing a similar path of introducing a resolution, we introduced that resolution back in February, which basically LA City Council, all 15 members voted unanimously in support of it. And that they were basically saying that they would commit American Rescue Plan dollars to fund arts and culture. They all voted unanimously. That became a point for us to be able to rally community support. There was a ton of community support. And so there's been a lot of talk during this amazing panel conversation about both grass tops and grassroots leadership. And so I'd like to just spend a minute diving really deep with you into grassroots leadership. Can we pull up the slide, please? Thank you so much, Jade Alyssa. So Arts for LA deeply believes in building grassroots leadership. And we're deeply invested in it as a model for everything that we do. Grassroots leadership is not something that we can just turn the key and say, hey, you know, folks submit thousands and thousands of letters. It's something that as a community, we have to build that community. We have to be intentional about cultivating that community so that that the community can support when the time is right. We see our role as Arts for LA as largely keeping our community informed and creating the systems and the processes by which our community can easily take actions. And so I'm going to introduce to you our grassroots ladder of engagement, and just huge shout out to Cordelia Estelle, who is our director of organizing. If y'all have not met her, please do. She is incredible. She's developed this for us. Arts for LA has a community roughly of about 77,000 folks. What we did around ARP was introduce a campaign. The name of our campaign was Arts Make LA. We launched that in January of this year. And we started to encourage our community to take actions around that resolution that I mentioned to you in the month of February, and every single moment that that there was essentially when the city was discussing how American Rescue Plan dollars would be spent, our community was taking action. There were over 2,000 actions that were taken by our community from January, well, actually just in the month of April alone. There were around 2,000 actions that were taken, meaning folks submitted letters of support and every city council member heard from our folks. That's a quick, easy action that folks can take 1 to 2 minutes. We also host monthly community meetings. We call them the Community Action Network meetings. These are meetings where Cordelia, our organizer, again, takes a moment to share updates on what is happening around all the specific legislation that we're following. We get sometimes 30 folks who join that Community Action Network meeting, sometimes 70, 100, depends on the month. But these are for arts advocates who are interested in and have the time to invest 1 to 2 hours per month. They join these meetings. Folks figure out what they can do over the month to support the campaign, and then we'll coordinate and we'll organize those specific actions, and then folks go out to their communities and take those actions. Very last bit, from those. Then we also are working very closely with a smaller group of folks who have self-identified and said, hey, I am willing to commit 4 to 5 hours of time this month. What we try and do is then work directly with those individuals to help them figure out, unpack what it means to lead an advocacy visit with their local legislator, what it means to organize their community. If they have friends from within a specific district and they want to meet with their local elected official, they can self-organize a group, participate in a legislative meeting. We'll help them understand what that meeting, how the meeting flow should go. We'll work with them on leveraging their stories and sharing their stories with elected officials. But we put folks in the driver's seat of experiencing what it is like to have these direct relationships with their legislators. One of the reasons we're so invested in grassroots in grassroots organizing is because we really want to create a community where if myself or Cordelia or others transition out of this role, we still have a community that fundamentally understands this process and can engage in this process directly, that feel empowered by these experiences and can do it for whatever it is the issue that they care about most. And so this is our ladder of engagement. All these arrows that are pointing down are basically to share that, as folks move up the ladder, they're constantly working directly back with their community. So even though they're moving up the ladder of engagement, it's about cultivating support from their networks. Because then we're getting network of network support. Lastly, I just want to share with you a very quick video. It's just a 1-minute video where you can see one of our community leaders. Her name is Joyce Kwong. She's a current Activate leadership development member, an incredibly powerful advocate, artist. She met with her local legislator, it was a state legislator, this past April. And I'll share with you here, if we can cue up that video of her advocacy. She did it in her own way.
The Empire State invests $2.31 per capita in arts and culture. The land of 10,000 lakes, over $6 whole dollars per capita in arts and culture. So how does the largest creative economy in the US measure up? It might come as a shock.
She's about to bring it home.
California funds a paltry 73 cents per capita in arts and culture. The Golden State ranks not even silver or bronze per capita in arts and culture. Let's bring it up to $1, supporting a one-time increase from 26 to 40 million for the California Arts Council. Invest in arts and culture for sustainable communities, for resilient economies, for a better recovery.
All this to say, we're an incredibly powerful community of advocates. And any way in which we can engage that grassroots support just means so much. So thank you.
That's awesome, Gustavo. So inspiring. Thank you so much for all your work and for that very, very clear understanding. And I think what's important here, and I invite all of us now into the conversation and to take a look at the questions as well. But, you know, Gustavo and I both run professional, quote unquote, professional advocacy organizations. This is what we do day in and day out. But I think what you heard from everyone so far is that advocacy has to be a part of your work in order to get to a place where the public is aware of the impact of what you do in your community. And when those opportunities for public funding are there, that you're poised and ready and not showing up, you know, huffing and puffing and saying, oh, wait, we're here. Can we get some of that? But instead, you've developed a long-term relationship where they recognize that. Of course, it's work and it takes time, and it's a sliver of what you have to do, especially if you're running organizations that are grant-making organizations or service organizations, or you're doing programming. And so we understand that asking you to add that into your daily work is hard. But I can also tell you, as many of you said, it can be incredibly rewarding when they really start to make the connections and you start to see that happen. So let's take a look at some of the questions that are in there. And the first one is actually just a quick, are these funds related to the recent small business grants from the state arts and culture round 4? And the answer to that is no, these are different. That was actually something that the governor put into early action funds, and our organization, along with California Association of Museums, lobbied to have a specific round for arts and culture without a cap on cultural organizations' budget sizes. And the governor had put in 25 million. We lobbied to get it to 50 million. And that did get through. There's actually $16 million still left in that fund. And so the governor has put in his May revise that will now be reopened. So stay tuned and we will let you know. We won't know for sure, and what they call trailer bill language, what is in the actual language of those specific funds until June 15th when the budget gets passed. So that's a hopefully short answer to that. Do you have tips for standing out or building support for newer organizations? And I'm going to combine that a little bit with the second question, which is talking about fiscally sponsored nonprofits as well in that conversation. So a lot of times newer organizations are fiscally sponsored. So any of the panelists want to try and any tips standing out or building support for newer organizations and ones that may in fact be fiscally sponsored, not yet 501c3s? Anyone want to take that? Come on, don't be shy. Maria? Yeah, go for it.
Arts County has a program that also offers fiscal sponsorship. And I would say if you don't already have a relationship with your local arts nonprofit, that's a really great place to start. And if there's any kinds of arts coalitions locally, coalitions are a really important way to kind of get yourself on the map and begin to build the relationships. Again, relationships are advocacy. They're at the real heart of any kind of effort to get the results that you want, I'd say. I don't know if my colleagues have anything else to add.
Eliza?
I would say absolutely yes as an answer to that question, because that's why fiscal sponsorship exists. It exists, you know, to create innovation and spur growth, social and economic growth within any given community. And it's by drawing upon the resources of the larger agency to which you're attached that you make yourself, in the very beginning, appear to be a more viable organization in the sense that, so for example, you can apply to California Arts Council, you can be a fiscally sponsored project, and whereby if you were a new organization and you had to show 2 years, for example, of arts programming, you wouldn't be in a good position. But if you're a fiscally sponsored project, then you're drawing upon the experience of the mother organization, the mothership. So absolutely yes, in theory, yes. And then you would hopefully, like Maria suggests, you would hopefully have a relationship with the organization which is fiscally sponsoring you, so that they can support and advocate for you with that funder that you're, so I think yes.
And I would just add, in terms of tips, I would say that for standing out or building support for new organizations, that, what Maria said was in terms of coalition and reaching out, talk to the other people in your community who are doing the work, who've been there now, and introduce the work that you're doing and the impact that you're making and the gap that maybe you're filling in your community, why you exist, and really, ask them for how have they been developing their relationships, and could they introduce you to some of the influencers and things like that. So I would say that, that kind of coalition building is really important, because what's going to happen with ARP funds, I mean, Rick already has secured sort of those funds to go, for example, Rick, to your board, each, and then, is that right, in Orange County, Rick?
You broke up there, Julie, so I couldn't hear.
Sorry. I didn't know my internet wasn't good. Rural community. Is my question for you was, sometimes with the funding will, first you have to advocate to get the funding just directly to arts and culture. And that's not necessarily going to be, as we just heard, one organization doing that. It's a collective, it's a coalition, but it might be led by a group like Arts Orange County that's been established in a long time. It might be led by Nevada County Arts Council or the Arts Council Santa Cruz County. So make sure you're talking to those folks. But once that funding's been secured, how does a new organization stand out to either who's making the decisions within who gets those grants?
Oh, what a complicated question that is. Just to illustrate the point, in Orange County, the Board of Supervisors decided each supervisor got to create, devise, implement, and manage his or her own grant-making program. And so we have 5 different programs, and they're not even approved yet on the ARPA funds. And one decided to just do $5,000 grants across the board, and others are looking at tiered funding levels based on size of organizations. Another one is saying, well, really the arts groups in my district that need it the most are dance studios and dance schools. So I want to give it all to them. So we try our best to advise them as to best practices and to represent the field in a way that benefits everyone, but it's complicated.
So, and there is a question that's related with ARP funds will be available to what additional ARP funds will be available to smaller organizations? Will they be funded through the city, county, state organizations? And so I think, again, in every city and county and state, it's going to be different. And so what you need to do, again, is either contact, if you have an advocacy organization or a leading group that is leading the charge, like the folks on this call, make sure you're in contact with them. But you can also certainly be tuning into your city council meetings and learning how they are allocating these funds, and then seeing what kind of grant proposals that they're looking for as they come down, right? Does anyone have anything else to share? Gustavo, I see you leaning in.
Yeah, I can add a little bit here, and I'm actually, I'm not sure if I closed the loop on that whole advocacy push that I mentioned with LA City, but I just wanted to flag that, that LA City advocacy push with the resolution not only backfilled LA City Department of Cultural Affairs, but it actually increased their funding by 5.3 million, a 30% increase for LA City Department of Cultural Affairs. So that's ARP money backfilling and then increasing 30%. The money will be administered through the LA City Department of Cultural Affairs, at least here for LA City. It will be administered through LA City Department of Cultural Affairs. And so keeping in close contact getting on the list of LA City Department of Culture, that's going to be key to knowing when those applications open and when it becomes, that whole process is going to be important. We're also doing advocacy on the LA County side, which the county should release their American Rescue Plan spending dollars first week, second week in June, but then that will have a whole nother bucket of money. So for us here in the region, it's keeping close eye on your local arts agencies. That's where the monies are being administered. But I also want to touch on one other thing related to the fiscal sponsorship question. So we are, Arts for LA, we're doing this immediate response work of getting the American Rescue Plan dollars to the arts. But some of the longer term work that we're doing is ensuring that fiscally sponsored organizations, right now, currently, folks can apply through LA City if Community Partners is your local fiscal sponsor, but we want to try and broaden that out so that there are other fiscally sponsored partnerships, basically to ensure that folks who have more flexibility in the way that they can apply, because we think that there's currently a lot of barriers to folks who are fiscally sponsored to be able to apply through local arts agencies. That's the main point. There's too many barriers. So how do we as advocates start to break down those barriers so that more folks can become eligible to apply for these types of funds?
And that was a major issue with the California Relief Grant Program too, where it was only certain NIACs, certain codes were allowed to apply, and C3s only, and things like that. So that was one of the barriers that we're seeing in our direct advocacy for this. Hopefully next round will be to see if we can expand it, but we'll keep you informed. I wanted to go to a question from Trevor Allen, who is the vice chair of the Vallejo Commission for Culture and the Arts, and gives an excellent description of kind of how that community has changed. And he's talking about how the demographic numbers from the last census, he's saying it's a cultural melting pot and it's a glimpse of what the state will look like in the future. And what that means is that there's a huge portion of our population that are underrepresented, underserved, and historically underfunded. We are seeking equity and inclusion for our BIPOC community. The youth in this town have very little access to the arts. Cultural institutions, artistic groups, and the multicultural artistic community have been sorely neglected. Sadly, not a story we all haven't heard before. If you were, and I'm going to ask each of one of you if you would just give one piece of advice to Trevor Allen, because I'm sure there's other folks on this webinar who have similar stories in their communities. One piece of advice to our city council about how they could help to secure state or federal funding for these groups and for the people, what would it be? Or one piece of advice on, he's asking that question, and then also I'm going to add to his question, one piece of advice in terms of building that case making within that community, specifically to the city council, to allocate, Trevor, the funds that they're getting to serve the people that you're talking about. Does anyone have some suggestions for Trevor and others on the call?
Well, I'll jump in and to say, hey, Trevor. Trevor used to be on staff at TVA back in the day, so great to have him here. Yeah, oh my gosh. I mean, I think, and I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before with Prop E and Prop S. I think it's building that coalition so that when you go to the city council, they can see you're really talking about a wide swath of folks from the community, and you're looking at communities of color. And, Vallejo doesn't have an opera or, a symphony necessarily, but at least not of the size of the ones in San Francisco, but all, as much as possible, to get all of the different representation to be there to make the case that this is a broad community, and it's a community that is giving back to the city and to all the different communities within Vallejo, so that they can see that this is something that enriches the city and enriches people that they know and communities that they know. I would start with that.
Any other comments for Trevor?
Trevor, you are not alone. God, there's several things I could say. I want to just speak to one or two quickly. This idea of advocating for versus advocating with is a really important distinction to make. And I think if in line with, I'm sure, the many things we've learned over the last year, all of us, around what it means to have and be racial equity, to embody it. When it comes to advocating, really, I encourage us all to practice advocating with me, which means bring those folks with you and do the training around what a relational meeting looks like and feels like and sounds like. And just to reiterate, be clear about your results. I think a lot of times we get caught up in the jargon, but we're creative people. Identify the stories that will get you the results that you want. Again, be specific about the results. Our results, we were intentional. We wanted to increase our grant awards to BIPOC communities. And we did so from 6% to 23% in a matter of 2 years. Because we were very intentional, we knew what we wanted, and being strategic allows you to think about who actually needs to be at the table. There's a lot to say about this one. I'll just keep it there.
I'd just say you have to walk the walk, and for us, that has meant gradually over the years, transforming the composition of our own board of directors to reflect the demographics of our own community, which is, I hate the word, but, majority minority, or minority majority, but, we're now majority of non-white people in Orange County, despite our long-standing image as a white bastion. And we have a very robust board of BIPOC voices who can help connect us with people, who can ensure that their communities' needs are addressed in all that we do as an organization. And I think we all have to make sure that, it isn't just something we're going to do externally to our own organization. This whole equity, diversity, and inclusion ambition that we all have. It does start with ourselves.
Thanks. So thanks, Rick. We're getting close to the end here. Want to respect everybody's time. It goes fast when you have such dynamic and incredible speakers. I'm so grateful to all of you for taking the time. I know how busy everybody is, particularly we're all in budget seasons and everything else within our communities, fighting for those dollars right now for arts and culture. Felicia has a question, and I think it's relevant to actually end with. And I loved what you said, Maria, around advocating with versus advocating for. I appreciate that very much, that distinction. And her question is, any tips on getting more individual artists interested in advocacy? So many artists, so many directions. And I'm just going to give my anecdote, which is that I think what Gustavo just shared in terms of an artist using their voice and their practice to tell the story. We experienced that this year too with an assembly hearing where Keisha Dumas Heath gave a testimony, and she did it in the form of a poem. And it was so impactful that legislators tweeted out about it and said that was like the best testimony they've ever had at a hearing. And I think one of the things that we, and I take this as an advocacy leadership position, often try to do, as Maria said, was like use the jargon, sound like a politician, instead of saying, no, use your voice, your authentic voice, to tell your story in a way that that actually it truly does move people. And I think when we not use artists, but when our artists are given permission to utilize their practice and their voice in that authentic way, I actually think that that's going to make such a significant difference in terms of our advocacy and in moving the needle. So it's 4:30, and Maria, yeah, go for it. I'm going to give you each a last word, please.
Invest. With regard to that question, invest. Spend your time and resources on, again, strategically identified artists that are ready to step in. The readiness is there. The one-to-one relational tool is magic. Listen deeply and you'll hear. Listen with your heart and mind together, you'll hear. Artists are ready to step in, and to say our doors are open and to send an email is not enough. That's not assertive enough. We need to be more proactive. Invest.
Excellent. I love it. I love it. All right, I'm going to give everyone a last word. Rick?
So just on that same topic, I would say one of the good things about the pandemic is these kinds of gatherings that, we don't have to travel and spend all that extra time to try to get together and hear each other and share things. And so we've conducted over 85 Zoom roundtables over the past year with 16 different cohorts of arts organization leaders and individual artists. And it's made a huge difference in terms of our knowledge of our community, of our opening up the opportunity for other voices. And so, you really need to bring people into the picture. And it's so easy now with Zoom, although we can't wait till we can all get together face to face and have some wine.
Excellent. Thank you, Rick. Eliza?
I'm going to hearken back to the ancient Greeks. Socrates saw the state, the ideal state, as a great and noble steed, a horse, which had to be reminded of its proper duties. And while Plato used Socrates as an example that all societies need a gadfly to sting the steed of state into acknowledging its proper duties and obligations, we fully intend to continue playing the role of a gadfly here in Nevada County and encourage everyone else to, and hopefully with a happier outcome.
Awesome. Brad?
Sure. And how do we engage individual artists, I think, is a great question. And I think sometimes we have to help connect the dots to funding. So one of the reasons why Prop E was successful as well was that we had a lot of individual artists helping us, and the unions, like Actors Equity, was incredible in mobilizing their members because they were able to communicate that more money for those theaters meant more jobs and better paying jobs for their members and others. So I think this idea of all of us working together is the most important thing. And that means that we have to have some difficult conversations sometimes with each other. And we need to be really honest, and we need to do that work behind the scenes before we go in and make the presentation, as we advocate with instead of advocating for. I love that phrase.
Fantastic. And Gustavo?
Only thing to add, artists, our experience has been that artists are natural community organizers, natural community builders. Artists hold the power to transform, to heal communities. And so part of what we're trying to practice is hiring artists. Our current digital organizer and individual who leads all our social media platforms is an artist, and we're trying to be very intentional about that in our employment.
Excellent. Well, again, I just want to thank all of you for your time, for your wisdom, for your advocacy, for your leadership. And I know that together we will get there. And don't give up hope. Keep showing up, and certainly reach out to any of us if you need support or if you just want to chat about next steps. So good luck, everyone out there. And thank you again. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Muchas gracias a todos y todas.
Thank you.
Gracias.